This is the Get a Life podcast. Ex-Cult Conversations.
To the teachers that I know are listening to this, I just want to say something as a former student that was sexually assaulted in high school, and I've helped a myriad of kids leave. Now that some of who have been abused, some who have been raped, and I'm seeing the effects on those kids that will last a lifetime. Whilst I understand you have your family you're caring for as a teacher, your job, your career, and it's your source of income. You go into teaching, from my understanding, to care because you care about kids, because you care about the welfare of kids, and in particular, you're caring for kids that really don't have a family or structural society around them, the Exclusive Brethren or the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, that have them in their forefront. It's business, cult, religion first, and we see that by the way that you're excommunicated and shunned, and a plethora of other reasons. So they need people like you to come forward. They don't have anybody else, and it's your duty to come forward and protect these kids. Yes, it might cost you your job, but at the end of the day, we're talking about kids that are abused. So I'm just taking this moment to beg you, if you have or know of anything, do what you obviously care for kids, you're working with them. So care for them. Come forward and tell your stories. We beg you, because the lifelong consequences of the effects of abuse never go away.
No.
These kids are with them from their relationships to their jobs to intimacy within relationships, because of a position whereby somebody could have stepped up and said, hey, no, this is not okay.
And I think what I would add to that is just saying that I always tell people to put yourself in the shoes. Especially if you have children, put yourself in the shoes of what you would want someone to do for your child or for your children to be. You don't want to put a price on somebody's life and what they're going to suffer from. And what you put out there comes back to you, right? So always put yourself in the shoes of what, if this was your child, what would you want someone in the position that you're in to do, right? I think it's super important, because as soon as we put ourselves into somebody else's shoes, automatically the right decision is made, because nobody wishes that on anybody.
And but in particular, kids, you can understand, if you have kids and you can say, okay, if this is my kid being abused, what would I do?
Yeah, or your nieces and nephews. There's children around you in your life somewhere. 100% there's children around you in your life somewhere. What would you want a person in your position to do if they knew something was happening to that close person, that close child in your life? That's how you have to think.
No matter
it's a moral imperative. It's an absolute moral imperative. I don't care if it's, the child of a king. I don't care. If you suspect that there's something going on with that child, how can you sleep at night if you don't do something about it? How can you do that? You can't. You can't do that.
The only way we're going to stop this pandemic, right? It's the only way we're going to stop it is if everybody realizes that, yes, it's disruptive in your life. Yes, there's all the equations that are going to happen out of it. But ultimately, you are saving that child. That's what you're doing. You're literally saving that child.
100%.
And regardless of what happens, history's happening. We're on the right side of history.
Yeah.
And are you going to be there? Regardless of what happens, someone one day is going to report it. Imagine it all being traced back and you knowing that kid and then being like, I could have stopped this years in advance. And no matter how much they offer you in money to, sign an NDA or keep quiet, it's a child's innocence. It's a child's life. And I am directly related to and dealing with somebody that's battling from that, from being raped as a child. This is your opportunity to help.
Yeah, I could never understand in any situation someone that did not take those steps. And yeah, you were mentioning, like this is, your career. I think in this particular time in the history of the world, you can walk into any school with a degree and pick up a job. You are not going to have difficulty picking up a job. Yes, you mentioned, Ben, that, teachers who have worked at OSG for a while may not have the professional knowledge that their colleagues will have in other schools. However, those schools are going to be willing to upskill you.
Yeah.
And what you said, Cheryl, about making sure, if this was a child that was in your life facing this, what would you do? That child is in your life. That child's in your class. That child's at the school where you work and you teach. You've invested into that environment by being a teacher. At that school environment, and you're one of the few outside contacts that those kids have. How can you sleep at night if you don't do something about it? I don't.
You're probably the only person that can actually change the situation.
Yeah.
And I would also add that reporting it to a Brethren member, CEO, is not going to help the child at all.
Yeah, it's got to be the police.
It will likely make it worse for them. You have to go to the police. You've got to go to external authorities.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm not sure of the law, like in the UK or the US, but here in Australia, it is very clear that you have to, when you're a mandated reporter, you have to report that to a child protection agency within your state. You have to. You don't have a choice. So you were saying, before, if it comes back to you years later and you find out that you could have stopped this, you're also likely to be charged criminally.
Yeah.
I don't get that one. That one makes me sick to my stomach. I don't understand that one at all.
I get it. It's fair, but at the end of the day, put yourself in that person's shoes. You're the only, and like I said at the start, you're the only thing in this world that gives us hope, because you're the only link to the outside world. And they can't take away all the teachers, because they need the teachers, because they don't have the education, or you aren't allowed to educate within the Brethren. So you will be the only people that can help us kids.
Exactly, 100%. And there's other ways. Yeah, one of the reasons that I was disappeared is because that they knew that I wouldn't take their crap. That, for example, if there was a situation like that, I would report. I would speak up if the actions of, I like to call them the vampires, because I always felt like they were gargoyles above, looking down on us as teachers and making sure that we didn't overstep our boundaries. That was one of the reasons that I was disappeared. The other one was Brethren businesses, like businesses all over the world, suffered financially during the pandemic, and the schools are a business, and I was too expensive. They couldn't afford to keep me on, even though there was a very, very strong indication when I was interviewed that that position would be continued to be ongoing. A teacher was disappeared while I was there. The campus vampires had a meeting with the primary sector staff and said, we've got the right team in place now. We're ready to move forward. Let's put this in a contract. So they basically told me that I had a job. Then they advertised it, and I had to go through the process. Now, for those of us who've worked in different school systems, that's how the game's played. You will go through the interview and the job's yours at the end. I'd already accepted a position at another school for the next year, so I really didn't care either way. I went into the interview. The vampires were in there, and the new head of campus was in there because the campus head, who was not white, was moving on. So they asked me all sorts of questions about the things that I thought they were doing well and the things that they need to improve on. It was a very weird interview. So they were pumping me for information as to how that they could make their school better. And then on the Thursday evening, the team and I were working back, and we were, preparing for the next week as teachers do. And the two campus vampires and the new head of campus came in with a very, very young teacher, definitely a graduate. And, I didn't have, at that point, I had no idea. I thought, like maybe they're employing her in secondary or whatever. But it turned out that she was the teacher that they were going to replace me with, because I was too outspoken, and they used me for what they could get out of me as far as improving their school, and then said, see you later. Like I said, I didn't care. I already had a position at school for the next year. What I found really abhorrent with that situation was that this young girl was of Indian descent. And so they had employed her on a campus level. They'd approved her employment. Now, I don't know what happened, but the next week they were re-interviewing, and I'm thinking that from central office they've said no because she was Indian. And for those of us on the outside, we know that Indians can be very traditional in their ways of thinking, but they're also exceptionally hardworking people. And I have no doubt that she would have been a great teacher. And I'm sure that she picked up a position in another school. But the fact that she was offered a role at a campus level, as I was, and then the next week they're re-interviewing, I know exactly what happened. It's because she wasn't Caucasian. She didn't meet the standards. And I'm still confused as to why they okayed her. My thinking is that the new campus head, who didn't last very long, my understanding is they lasted 6 months before they told them they could shove their job, did not realise the depth of racism within the organisation as well. And so they've made the approval for the employment of that teacher, because they would have been told, you have to get the cheapest teacher you can because our business has been affected and we can't afford an experienced teacher. And so they've employed the cheapest, best teacher that they could get, and then they would have been told no, and they would have been smacked over the wrist because that person wasn't Caucasian. For those people that don't know, there is not one child of colour within an OSC school, not one. They're all Caucasian. They do not get the experiences of a rich multicultural education or being exposed to that.
There is a couple sprinkled throughout, but they are brethren that have migrated from Africa or Caribbean. It's not, and they will use them on the website as the sprinkled token to make them look multicultural. They are not, and they are looked down on so much. Interracial marriages are not allowed, and were not approved. People were kicked out if they married a white or a black, like within the brethren. And just to attest to your how racist the brethren are, and I'm glad you brought that up. In my years, when I was in year 7, we went through 5 Indian, Pakistani, South African teachers of color, and on different nationalities. They were absolutely bullied within an inch, like just the most horrific abuse from kids, and were moved. And it doesn't, like, for instance, like I understand why that they don't want to employ other than Caucasian, because they know how much how much of an effect it will have on the kids, because the kids aren't exposed to that in the same way. The gay community, in the same way, anything slightly outside of their narrative, the kids react to, and it would obviously distract from their learning.
And the way that the kids would speak about people of different races, for example, was horrific. And it's probably another reason why I was let go, is because I would pull the kids up on it. I'm a big one for Indigenous rights in Australia, and I hadn't heard the word, and my apologies, my sincere apologies to any of my Indigenous brothers and sisters that hear this, but please understand the context. I hadn't heard the word boom since the early 1980s. But the children would use it freely to identify anyone who was not Caucasian.
Well, just to give you context, outside of Australia, that and the A word, to talk about our Indigenous people, in the same as using the N word. Like it's so derogatory, so horrific, and it was just everyday talk. Like I remember my dad, one of his favorite sayings was, "Oh, I'd do the same for a black fella." Like it was constantly, seamlessly integrated into their thought process. That they were above, they were, you know, and it all comes back to their Bible and their interpretation of the Bible. I mean, despite the scientific evidence that Jesus was a Northern African, not a Caucasian white man, that is just modern day artists' paintings. It blows my mind. And this is back to beggars belief, how limited their education is and their knowledge. And you're talking about your words. It makes me so angry when I look at things like the Rapid Relief Team where they're celebrating NAIDOC Week.
Yeah.
I'm like, how about you celebrate it by working with your own community and explain how important it is that you don't use terms like this.
Yep.
But if it's not making them money or giving them publicity, right? It's not about, like, that's the thing that needs to be exposed, is the reason why they have these RRT and these charities that cover up who they really are.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, like, come back to what you were saying about NAIDOC, Ben. You know, NAIDOC was actually during the school holidays here this year, which was really poor timing. However, we did a lot of work in my classroom, which is obviously no longer at OneSchool this year, around NAIDOC. So for those outside of Australia, NAIDOC Week and Sorry Day, etc., are days that are not celebrated, but it's recognised and recognising and acceptance of Indigenous cultures within Australia, which is something that has really grown, and I'm sure you would agree, Ben, over the last 10 to 15 years has become very much central to our conversation. And we're having a Ben, help me, it's early. What's the word? I'm
in the same tone zone. Calm down. It's awareness.
We're having a referendum. Yeah, we're having a referendum on a voice to Parliament, which is simply that there would be a group of Indigenous people who can offer a lens, an Indigenous lens, or an Indigenous way on thinking on any proposed legislation. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where politics becomes tricky, and where things like focusing in on or understanding other cultures is frowned upon, because it becomes political. And the teaching of politics was not something that we were allowed to be involved in. And
I remember at school speaking against George Bush and his interference into the Middle East. Now, the Brethren absolutely adore and worship John Howard and George Bush and what he did. And I remember instinctively, and I regret it to this day, and with other kids, speaking out against this teacher because of her opinions of George Bush. So if you're ever watching this, I'm sorry that now I have a very different opinion about George Bush, but it was heavily indoctrinated into you that he did what was right. He did save the Middle East, whereas the facts today that Iraq is in a worse condition than it ever was because of the US.
Absolutely. And that entire war, as with anything to do with the Brethren, the world was, and the Brethren is all about money. And that's that's why they worship George Bush, because it's all about money.
Yeah, I was just going to say, did you so on the note of racism, did you notice anything else within that community, like homophobia, for example, or
The word faggot was, again, and my apologies to those in the LGBTQ community, because that is such an offensive word and it is not one that I use. Again, I'm an advocate. My sister-in-law is bisexual. We have members within the community, within my family, and I find that offensive. But yeah, the word faggot was thrown around. The kids did not understand what that meant, but the word faggot was thrown around a lot. It was used as an insult. They understood it was an insult, but they did not understand what it meant.
What did you ever come across the expression? Because one of them that was most common, and I think most degrading for me, like it used to really like feel like self-harm, was when people would say, when something wasn't going right, oh, it's just so gay, or that's gay, like it was synonymous with the word crap, like it was less than.
Yeah, and again, I think that comes back to the idea of the thought process seemed to be 15 years behind the rest of the world, is in saying that something was gay in the early 2000s, oh, that's so gay, as an insult. It wasn't necessarily used as an insult against gay people, but yeah, it was used as an insult to say that something was lame or something was stupid. But what people didn't realise by using that was that they were actually being highly offensive. And we know that. I knew that at the time, and it's not something that I used in my vocabulary. I remember having conversations with people about it, which growing up country, where again, things can be a little bit behind. Yeah, I was laughed at for that. But yeah, that insult of something being gay and as being put down is obviously a horrendous slur, but it's also used. And again, I don't think the kids really understand what they're saying with that, because they haven't been exposed to it.
Yeah,
they don't know what that means. Like they've been exposed by telling them that it's wrong, but they haven't been exposed to the richness of the community. They don't understand.
And why it was wrong, they would then, because they have such a hatred for gays, like it's such a hatred. And I think, like, I know this because I hated, the gays. Like it was such a, myself, it's such a hatred. Sorry, I haven't got my glasses. What is this?
This is a very, very recent review that was put on about OneSchool Global. It's from July 22nd of 2023. And it's titled Homophobic and Racist. And it's from a teacher in Sydney. And the pros are, there are absolutely no other pros other than the kids are poor, unfortunate souls trapped in a multi-generational cult. Collins do not work here. They are only members of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, exclusive brethren. They are extremely racist, ageist, sexist, homophobic views, starting with the CEOs, trustees of the school, down to the kids. The school are not about furthering the education of the students, as they're forbidden to go to university. Highest turnover of staff I've ever witnessed. And I just can't read the rest of it. But I mean, there's a very recent review. I'll attach a bunch of reviews onto the end of this podcast that people can read through, that give a very stark and harsh reality of what former teachers think of OSG. What would you say, in your opinion, is their downfall of this of their school?
So there's two for me. The first one is treating education like a business. That never works. It doesn't work in independent schools either, but particularly for the fact that businesses are operating out of their campuses. School is not a business. School should be about preparing kids for their futures. And if you're in a closed community, it's a perfect vehicle to prepare the kids for the future within that community. And that's very much, or very clear. The second one for me is the fact that because they are so closed, they don't have the opportunity to experience anything other than what they're exposed to within that very small cloistered society. And so therefore those kids' potentials and the potential as to who they could be is not being fostered. And that's in a number of ways. It's within obviously the lack of clear and rigorous thought within education. It's around the IST, that we just came through that screenshot, the fact that I was in my 40s, I wasn't seen as young and pretty. So, I wasn't something to aspire to. Same with another friend who has recently left, was no longer young and pretty, so therefore wasn't acceptable. The aging women within the system, that's something else entirely. But yeah, they were treated really poorly. The way that people with disabilities are isolated that I mentioned earlier, that is disgusting, and it's really concerning.
They would happily take the government's money for the NDIS.
Oh, of course they do. Of course they do, because like having an aide in the classroom is seen as being a support. That aide isn't used for that. That aide's used to cover books or to work with the secondary students to make sure that they get that magic 31 score so they get more money.
Wow.
Also, the isolationism of the group itself leads to the way that the people with a range of abilities are treated, the sexism, the homophobia, the list just goes on. And I think, to me, that's the biggest downfall, is that the isolationism of the actual organisation itself is breeding generations of young people who A, don't have the opportunity to meet their potential, and B, are perpetrating, in the name of a very warped view of religion, what the leaders of the church see to be the way to live, which is not the way to live. It's just horrific. And that's the biggest downfall to me. The limiting of young people's potential is huge. Absolutely.
And what would you say to somebody if someone came to you and said, hey, I've got an interview at OSG next week. I've heard you work there. What would you say to that person?
Don't go. Don't even bother applying. The large majority of educators, and nearly all educators that I know, understand the importance of supporting kids' exploration of their sexuality, supporting children with disability, and that's not easy. We know that, but we consistently strive to make sure that we can find a way to support those kids well. Don't expect to be working there past the age that you're 35. Don't open your mouth against anything that the church doesn't believe in, because you won't have a job the next week. Do you really, is your moral imperative so poor that you're going to be willing to work in an environment where things like sexual abuse are swept under the carpet? Are you willing to do that for the sake of your job? I'd be there for an hour telling the reasons why not to go to that interview. Yeah. And the large majority of people that ask me about that, I would say don't even bother applying in the first place.
And we know that there is a bunch of mass walkouts happening. There's people being the school system globally is going through a huge upheaval now. And I mean, I think for all of us ex-members, we just hope that these children get rescued from a system like this and have to get put back into a regular public school system, because that's what they deserve. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whilst I might add that the public school system isn't free from the issues that were brought up,
no,
they are also able to get away with it, though. They aren't able to hide things under the table. They are accountable because they don't have community members running the school. They don't have a heavily educated system. They do have the forefront of the safety of the kids, the furthering of their education.
They get to meet friends outside of what they're being raised in, to realize then they've got these choices. Hey, you know what I'm living in doesn't really suit me. And so they develop their own personal opinion on whether or not this feels right to them or not. Right now, that choice is taken away from them. These children are completely indoctrinated 24/7 through education, through church goings, through their friends, through their parents, through the businesses that they get placed at. They have no choice on whether what they feel is right for them or not.
Yeah.
Well,
And
one thing I would,
sorry.
so I was just going to say there was a lot of outrage a few months ago when the Taliban forbid women in Afghanistan to go to university, and people were rightly upset and outraged. And at the same time, the governments in the Western countries are financing schools that don't allow any of the students to go to university. The Taliban are actually ahead. At least they let the boys go to university. And when you look at it in that context, you see why is the government financing this organization?
Yeah. And for me, that comes down to religionism, because the Brethren Church hides behind the veil of Christianity. And so therefore, from a Western perspective, they're seen as more desirable than, for example, an Islamic state such as Afghanistan is at the moment. Neither's desirable. Both are repressive, and both are violent in not only their actions but their deeds as well. And Cheryl, you were saying before about choice, and on reflection on that question that you asked about what would be the biggest downfall of the school system, it's the lack of choice and the lack of ability for kids to find out who they are. As you were saying, Ben, no school system is perfect. However, every other school system I've worked at has had an active policy around supporting and recognising students being able to identify their sexuality, for example. There is very strong, and it's written in law, and that's the part that I can't get over with OSG, is that it is written in law, and every school I've ever worked at has a very, very strong child safety policy. It's the first thing that's written in any school's mission statement, the first thing. And the fact that they are sweeping this under the carpet in a 1950s style way, it blows my mind. It's illegal, and yet governments are still funding this. I don't understand.
And that's the thing, they get away with it because they appear to. And look, the government isn't going to drill down into it unless people like yourself come forward and we raise awareness about it. But they get away with it because they appear to be having a reporting system. But if you drill down into it, the reporting system doesn't go anywhere but the Brethren. It's a smart sheet. It's a literal reporting system within their own school. So of course, if you're trying to prepare or keep your reputation looking smick, you're not going to allow these reports to go anywhere but your own system. So they have a reporting system, but it just goes to them. It just is within their own school.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
kids protecting.
Yeah, exactly. Like the little one that just appeared on the screen.
Right.
I'm so glad that they're not within that system, because the thought of a young
wants
child.
to tell them why. So, I mean, we're very grateful you came on and gave us an inside look as to what you went through. I want to invite all ex-OSG teachers that have left, have maybe contacted us before, that we can come on here and let's do this anonymously. Let's raise the awareness, because first and foremost, we've got to be able to try and give these children in these schools the opportunity of choice, the opportunity of being able to make a decision from what they know feels right or doesn't feel wrong. There might be children in there that want to have the system that they're in, but I can guarantee you that there are a lot of children in there that don't want to be in where they're on, but they don't know that, right?
Yeah.
So I invite those that want to come on here and do this anonymously, email us info.getalife@proton.me. You can find Ben on TikTok. I am on TikTok. There is a few other people who are on TikTok. Ann Hamilton is on there. Abby Thompson is on there now. Message Carmen's got an email address up there. I think this is the way that we need to go. I think we need to start giving these children a space and a landing pad of choice. And we do that by coming together and coming forward and exposing as much as we can so that they don't get the government funding that they do. It was almost taken away from them in Sweden. I think that it just needs to be constantly being exposed. And we know that they cannot continue covering up what they're covering up with the Band-Aids that they're using. It'll fall apart eventually.
It's something that I'm very passionate about, because the wrongs that I saw were just horrific. And the last thing I want to point out is a critic will say, hang on, you said that you worked in other schools, for example, Catholic schools. The difference between the Catholic schools or any other religious school and the OSG is that kids are allowed to have an opinion and they're allowed to explore. They have a life outside of their religion and they understand how the word works. Kids within brethren communities do not have that. And that is why I'm so passionate. But I mean, apart from the other reasons that I've mentioned, which are just as important, but yeah,
our next
huge.
scientist that can discover something that needs to be discovered is sitting inside OSG right now, not allowed to access. Our next breakthrough doctor could be inside there. There's so many of these people that are in tiny bodies in there that could be the people that we're waiting for, yet are blocked at being able to gift this planet with what they came here to gift the planet with, due to the schooling system that they're locked into. It should be illegal. If there was any other religious school doing what the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church gets to do with their school, it would be all over the news. There would be a huge uproar over this type of isolation, and yet it's happening in your backyard.
Yep.
And there were girls in my class that could literally run this world. They were so intelligent. And one girl, she was topped the state, and I've heard that she was never allowed to receive the award. I don't even think she knows to this day that she received an award because she wasn't allowed to, because they didn't want to know, the CEOs.
Yeah. And it's so wonderful to having that conversation about the fact that we're, as a global community, we're missing out on the potential that those people can provide.
Yeah.
And so are those people themselves. That simply
they didn't all just come here to be businessmen. They didn't all come here to be secretaries. You don't have that many people that just are coming here to choose that. You know that they're unfulfilled. And I mean, we've heard the stories up there, right? People's kids who, wanted to be a veterinarian, or people's kids that wanted to be a doctor and yet can't do that, right? So I think by coming on here, the way that we can set this up now, and help expose this, that we can make this change so that these people can be freed from the constraints that they're in and be who they came here to be.
Yeah,
So thank you,
exactly.
Ben, for joining us and coming on and sharing your experience. And
OSG teacher, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone for watching, and until next time, take care.
If you are in a high-demand religious group and need help, please go to oliveleaf.network. To share your story or be a guest on the show, email info.getalife@proton.me. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to Get a Life, and comment.